Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for Iowa Pork Industry Center's web series. Today we have Colin Johnson joining us. He's going to be touching on the fundamentals of rodent control for swine sites. And certainly as we look at the time of the year and the changing of our seasons, as we move towards colder temperatures, certainly rodents can be looking for warmer places to reside and continue to reproduce. And so I believe Colin's topic is very timely, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. I'll turn it over to Colin. Colin has been with Extension for now about 20 years, in the last 10 years as a field specialist for the Pork Industry Center. And I will hand it off to you, Colin.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, we're going to talk about something real pleasurable, right? Rodents, mice, rats, and other affiliated things. And I know the rodent term kind of varies regionally where you're at, but we'll probably focus mostly on rats and mice. So thank you, Mark. Mark and I are one of five. Am I muted?
Sorry, I wanted to just encourage our participants, if you have questions as we're going through the presentation, in the lower right-hand corner is a chat. Please enter your questions into the chat, and we'll certainly try to address them, be it through the program or at the end. Thank you.
Exactly. So great, Mark. Thank you. And neither Mark or I are mainly specialists in this area. You know, we study animal science. Mark, a strong background in nutrition, and we work in production environment, but study animal science and not rodent science. So it's something periphery, and it's certainly important to our industry, and one of the things we look at as far as some SOP and monitoring things around the farm. So. Okay. There we go. One thing I do want to mention to start off the discussion today, I want to promote and encourage your attendance at the Iowa Pork Congress. If you can click on that QR code there, and it'll bring you right up to registration. But put this on your radar for January. Lots of educational events, lots of great speakers there. Iowa State is there sharing information and being available. But you know, over 225 exhibitor booths are always there. Certainly a highlight of our industry in the Midwest to be able to converse with vendors and products, and then as well some of the educational opportunities that exist are phenomenal opportunities too. So okay, so let's get on our topic of rodents and why is this an issue? Really, I mean, we know it's an inherent pest, right? They've been around forever. I believe that ever since the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Rats or rodents appeared at that time, and the phrase "dirty rat" exists for a reason. Unpleasurable, nuisance, considerably all the time. And the other thing is, you know, we certainly provide an ideal environment for them in livestock production and farms. We have plentiful feedstock. We've got lots of habitat in and around fields and farm buildings and so forth for them to get to. And not only do we feed them, but we really feed them very plentiful. We feed them a good quality feedstock. We grind it up for them. We flavor it for them, put some fats and oils in there that really enhance it, so they enjoy what we certainly provide as far as pig feed or other nutrients, whether that's in the barn, outside of the barn, whether that's in storage, in bags and in mills and so forth like that. Really an ideal consideration. The other thing, much like the pig, they're just extraordinary reproducers, right? The reproduction rate on mice and rats and so forth is absolutely phenomenal. If we could tap into that, we'd really learn something strategic. A mouse can bear up to 150 pups a year, right? Most of them won't do that, but that's if you maxed out the calculations of what they could do, it's really there. And the other thing, it's really phenomenal, is that they both rats and mice, particularly rats, will adjust their reproduction and their repopulation rate really quickly, right? If they start to be decimated, if the dominant animals become killed or move on, they will replace themselves. They'll speed up their cycles quite quickly and so forth like that. So What else? Why is it more important here? What's the cost? You know, when it boils down to dollars and cents or other impacts on the farm, why is it so important? And I'm going to get into some particular diseases, but it's been known that there's around 45 known pathogens pretty easily carried by mice and rats. The other thing is it invites other varmints in, right, that can also be carrying disease. So predators to mice, predators to rats coming in or near the farm site as well could carry in some diseases too. Structural damage, obviously that's the key evidence. You see a lot of times they love to gnaw on almost anything, right? Insulation is one of their favorites, foam. So whether it's wood, whether it's curtains and so forth, we know we have costs to replace those things to clean some of those issues up. And then energy loss, right? So if we're creating holes, if we're losing insulation being drug out, there is certainly some heat or cooling exchange going on there. You have an uncontrolled inlet, we always say, right? When we have a hole or a leak somewhere, especially if we think about modern day production where we might be trying to filter a barn or use positive pressure in there. And so we can put dollars and cents pretty easily by what type of airflow rate are we losing, some uncontrolled CFM loss that exists there pretty quickly. And then the other thing, feed loss that they consume, maybe not as significant as, more importantly, the contamination. Animals will contaminate probably 10 times more feed than they will actually consume. You know, they're only consuming grams a day, ounces a day, but what they defecate in and their urine and so forth. And it doesn't necessarily maybe offend the pig as much as a lot of other species that certainly turn their nose up and will not eat contaminated feed in those regards. But that feed contamination again gets back to the disease potential that might be there as well. And then just the general unpleasantry that exists, right? The smell, the phobias that some folks might have of different things. You know, my spouse, she doesn't like spiders at all, right? Well, there's others that might not like a mice, so forth. So just say certain things about employee morale, keeping the populations at bay as well. Neighbor relations, particularly say in rats and so forth, if they're going to travel around the site or up and down in a community as well. And then, you know, that the odor, particularly associated with heavy populations, is pretty distinct. And really that's from urinary proteins, and they can even trigger asthma and so forth. So they generally say that if you're cleaning up, think about in your house or in a vehicle, if you get an infestation or one, generally not recommended to vacuum. Certain folks, it can really trigger some asthma conditions that are in there. And then there's a particular virus that's actually carried more, particularly in a deer mice, which we're not going to address today, but hantavirus is something pretty severe that can even lead to some respiratory things and even some pulmonary conditions long term, though. So something of note there. These are some particular diseases that I've pulled off of one of our fact sheets. It's available through the Pork Information Gateway. Like I said, there's 45 known types of pathogens that might be carried. These are a few of them that are particular to the pork industry, certainly of economic importance, production importance. Think of toxo, erysipelas conditions, lepto are certainly ones that I would keep my eye out for, carried by rodents and so forth in there. So one of the things we want to focus on today, and we have some other integrated work on integrated pest management, developing an IPM plan as part of your SOPs on your farm, and not just related to rodents, but insects, other pathogens that might be coming in present form and so forth. But having a sophisticated and a strategic, I think that's the key word I like to use when we think about a integrated pest management program, something that can be very systematic and forward thinking instead of responsive when populations get out of control. And so USDA defines a integrated pest management scheme as a science-based sustainable approach to managing pests by combining biological, environmental, cultural, physical, and chemical tools, right? All of these are tools overlaid together at different times and in different places to kind of minimize financial losses, impacts to health of the herd and or workers as well, and the environment in those regards. So One of the things about it, and we're going to look at this today, is kind of understanding the life cycle, right? So maybe not as important in rodents because they reproduce so quickly. But if we target juveniles versus adults versus those infants or those pups, certain components too. 6 main steps in an integrated pest management plan. Really, when we're going to look at identifying and differentiating species, so that we know what pests we're controlling. Obviously, when it comes to rodents, we know what pests we're after because we can see the signs of it, and we'll look at that a little bit today as well. And monitoring, assessing some of those numbers of damage. We cannot eliminate all mice in a given facility, I don't believe. Now, rats might be another thing we can tackle for sure if we get infestations there and stay on top of, but mice are probably an inherent condition in most facilities. Guidelines when management action is needed. So at what point and evidences do we step in and start changing our strategies? When do we bait more or less or not at all? Those things. So preventing problems, we'll look at a lot of things around the facility we can do as far as tidying up and sealing those things. So, and then really, and I'll close with this as well, is kind of monitoring our effectiveness. Was the strategy we use efficacious and how we tackled it? So what are the species of importance? I already mentioned, so house mice and Norway rats. Those are the two primary ones of consideration. We'll look at some differentiations there. If you look at that schematic on the side of your screen there, one of the things, obviously a rat's going to be much larger, so their footprint is larger. And in a rat, you'll see the whole foot pad, a larger back foot, a smaller front. And most distinguishing is in a trail of dust, in snow, in feed, and so forth, you would see a rat drag its tail. So you'll see some markings of a tail, and you will not see that in a mouse. So sometimes if you haven't seen evidence of the rat, and you're wondering, is this a young rat versus a mouse? Look for markings potentially of a tail. Mark mentioned when we kicked off this webinar, and it seems like we want to focus a little bit more on this in the autumn or the fall periods when rodents might be moving closer to indoors. And my mind in the past has always gone to thinking about field mice that live out in the fields. We harvest here in September through November, and it starts pushing mice in toward our facilities. And field mice really aren't the concern. Field mice are not coming inside of barns. They're generally going to burrow in to some thatch and residue out in fields. They're going to find some cover, and so they aren't the ones that we generally consider of importance coming into our barns. It's house mice that are the innate problem and innate dwellers with us. The other one to note would be roof rats. For Iowa, certainly not a pest. Those living in the coastal regions from Washington down to California, and then large regions from Texas on up around to Maryland, probably from a coastal standpoint, would have roof rats, a little bit different species than the Norway rat, but lots of similarities too, but just not dwelling in a Midwest environment for sure. So here's a load of humor for the day real quickly. Was working on a project just a couple days ago on a barn, and you'll see circled there a little critter, a tree frog. So we were working pigs through a scale all day long and had this tree frog. And quick question for you. What do you get when you cross a pig with a frog? Lighten up your day a little bit. The answer is a amphibian. Rats and mice. A little bit of comparison here real quickly. Obviously, you know that the rat is much larger, right? I mean, generally estimation, an adult rat's going to be about a pound, and the mouse is very, very small, right? But the features of them have some similarity. The body of a mouse is pretty small, a little rounder in shape. Body of a rat's pretty thick. They're heavy. From nose to tail, the rat's just a large creature. The tail in proportion to the body size on a mouse, house mouse, is a little bit longer than that on a rat, but very distinct in their things. One of the things I mentioned earlier about the tail dragging, the other thing would be droppings, right, or their dung. Larger from a rat, obviously. but the shape would be a distinguishing piece too. Long rounded ends or blunt ends to the rat, whereas the mouse is a very pointed or sharp ends to their scat, to their droppings there as well. So talk about just a few other things related to these two creatures in particular. Um, the mouse generally on a half an ounce to an ounce at the most, 5 to 7 inches long. They can fit through, estimated like a 1/4 inch opening, probably slightly larger than that on a typical mature or adult animal it would take to get through. But think about the size of a dime. Very easily fit through a hole or an opening the size of a dime. Uniquely, when you think about it, you recognize this: the house mouse, doesn't need water. They're going to be able to consume enough water through the feedstock that they're eating. It takes very, very little moisture for them to take. Not that they won't consume water when they find it, but they certainly don't need it. Reproduction wise, 5 to 7 pups in a litter. They can have 5 to 10 litters in a year. You do that math, there's 70, 75 of them easily. And as I said earlier, they can adjust their reproductive rates if they want to populate things pretty quickly. Mature in 6 to 8 weeks. The other thing interesting about it, a female mouse can come back into cycle within 3 days after having a litter there. Gestation, or excuse me, the cycles are like pigs and so forth, about 18 days, maybe up to 21. So consume up to 1/4% of their body weight. So you're just looking at a 1/4 ounce a day, but you start adding up several hundred of them in a population, and they're going to consume things, and more importantly, contaminate a lot of components to it. They can jump up to a foot. Sometimes you'll see, well, how did that thing get in a container or in a bucket? Well, it either, if it couldn't climb plastic and so forth, it'll jump it. But certainly great climbers in those features too. So Norway rat, I'm gonna make a side comment here in the fact that these truly are Norwegian rats. That name, who knows where it was associated with. These pests really come from Western Asia, Middle East, and so forth, several hundred years ago into Europe, and then were brought over here by ships, right? But known a lot of times as several other names, but generally just a common rat. Again, what it is not, as I said earlier, was that roof rat that exists in other regions of the country as well. So Mark, your ancestors, the great Norwegians, get the blame. And I would assume that's from the neighboring Swede back in the 1700s that came up with that taxonomy system of giving those Latin names in there, which was what Carl Linnaeus that gave up that process of naming plants and animals. So anyway, rats 7 to 8 ounces up to a pound. Certainly it'd be interesting to know what is the largest one on record, but they're distinguishable in their size, and even sometimes confused for folks that don't see a lot of rats would be a muskrat, right, or a small muskrat coming out of ponds and marshes as well. But up to around a foot long or more when you include the tail, fit through a 1/2 inch hole. So think more like a quarter-sized hole when it comes to considering where they can squeeze through. Very, very, very agile, right? Travel several hundred feet for nesting for food. Not that they have to do that. They may nest right next to food, but they can often travel 75 feet or even 300 feet if need be from where their nesting to food sources are. 8 to 12 in a litter, 5 plus. I've heard of even 10 litters in a year there. So obviously phenomenal reproduction rates, just like a mouse, and mature in a few months. Looking to consume around an ounce a day. Can jump a couple feet vertically, can jump about 3 feet horizontally. So very, very prolific creatures in those regards. So thinking about signs of activity. So how do we know they're present? And look at those previous 2 points of some of those pictures that we saw about their actions. But again, they're all agile, they're gnawing, they're burrowing. Generally, we call them nocturnal in the fact that they do get very, very active at night. Right around dusk, they start getting active and coming out and seeking things. So when it's dark is a good time to observe, right? So, curious about where they're at, where they're coming from. You walk into a barn with the lights off, you can go with a black light or some quick activity in the night. You'll see where their activity is. Very secretive, right? Especially if you think about a rat, stays burrowed down for the day and put away, and very secretive in those things. The other thing about them, there's a term called neophobic, which means they're scared of something unfamiliar. And we'll talk about that as we place traps or place baits. So unlike maybe people or other animal species that have no problem with something's changed around in a room, just accept it. Mice, rats, rodents are very peculiar and will avoid things that have been moved or put out of place for a few days. It'll be there. So I mentioned their prints, their differences there, and their feces. Their nesting material is obviously a good sign of activity. That rubbish, insulation, wood chips, they've drug something in place, thatch, to get there. Other sign of activity you'll notice on this picture here is some of these greasy markings up and down in and out of this opening. This is called sebum. It's kind of a greasy, oily substance that comes from the sebaceous glands. And think about like a ring around the collar on if you've had a hard working day and you sweat a lot and you get that marking around there. We produce oils out of our skins just as the rodent does as well, but theirs will rub up and down wherever their tunnels and runways are as well. So unpleasant for sure, but it's a good way to see where they've been at and where they're active. So let's talk about really what you want, right? The prevention. How do we prevent and control in a pest management plan? Number one, if we can prevent them altogether, then we won't have to control. We won't have to spend money on strategies to bait, and we won't have the structural damages, right? So number one is nesting areas. They need some place for cover. They need some vegetation outside. They burrow under junk and old equipment and trash that's leaning up against walls and facilities and so forth. Think about hay and straw piles. I know on my own farm, around some grain bins a few years back, even with gravel around the bins, we started developing some rats. Well, 50 yards away, I had stacked some hay in a barn on pallets, and pallets are a phenomenal place for rodents to get in under and create burrows. And so that's where they were building their nest, and then making trips back and forth to grain bins to do that. So if we can reduce some of those places, clean up the site, not only helps aesthetically, it helps us mow, but keep things mowed down. Ideally, a 3-foot gravel buffer, 2 to 3 feet, 1-inch type rock, something really coarse that they can't dig into, and at least 6 inches deep. And if we haven't had a rat barrier put in there, like hardware cloth, some of this small mesh that's in there, and you continually have problems, or you notice getting under a given building, that would be something to install as well under that rock. But that's a real key. You can keep them from coming up and jumping in and crawling through the building. It gives gives predators an opportunity to get after them as well. So, and then reduce feed sources, right? So out on our bin pans, not uncommon at all for us. We're going to have a little spillage when we check bins, when we open them up to do some clean out or some other repairs and so forth. If we can keep those leaks down, keep it cleaned up, not only for rodents, but other species we don't want, birds and wildlife. Think of feral swine in certain regions of the country. We don't want to invite anything up into our sites. Keeping aisles swept and clean, washed down, particularly, feed mills and anywhere we store ingredients and store bags. We know we have a perpetual problem there, and those locations certainly take some real severe strategies in addressing how to prevent things. So storing bags up off the floor, storing anything off the floor, right, would be really, really important here. as a prevention tool here. So other things, sanitizing, washing our facilities down. When we have all in all out production and we go ahead and clean and sanitize, not only are we getting rid of the feed sources, and they don't only feed on feed, they'll feed on feces, right? So if we have crusts of manure on a pit, they can scurry across and live on top of pits too. But boy, if we can wash and wash and wash and do a lot of drowning, it will destroy a lot of mice in those ways. Sealing holes, right? So curtains are always a perpetual problem, it seems like, when we're down, chewing holes in curtains, so keeping them in repair and baiting inside curtains would be an opportunity. Cracks in our foundation, gaps under doors. It's just that time of year when we need to go around and start tidying some of these things up. Not only just, again, for ventilation efficiencies and controlling our inlets, but keeping rodents and unwanted things out. So you can see here's a picture of one I just grabbed the other day where a lot of our feed lines coming in were sealed up. Had some good caulking. Here's one that obviously probably at one size that was sized for a 2-inch larger feed line, and then when a different one was run in, this gasket hadn't been resized or sealed with something else. So patching materials, you'll see on my list, foam isn't included in that, right? Stuffing insulation in a hole or using a $2.99 can of spray foam, mice love them, right? They love to chew that stuff as soon as the odor kind of wears off of it. So using mortar, using some type of steel, some sheet metal, I mentioned earlier, some wire mesh, hardware cloth, an ideal place to put things that they cannot chew, and again, get that stuff off the floor. Moisture wise, anywhere you notice you've got moisture and leaks, say in where your medicators are, where your well room or hallways are, they'll congregate there and take that opportunity to find moist places where animal activity doesn't exist to root out their nest and to tromp them too. So just a few visual examples, just able to grab just a couple of days ago for those considerations. So let's get to control after we go through some steps about prevention. Traps, right? Just the old standby, the one that's been out there for 100 years, the Victor snap traps. You can also find one-way boxes. You can find the boxes and mechanisms that teeter-totter when they go in as well. But these, I would generally say, for your office situation, right? In the place of outdoor context, it doesn't work. In the matter of animal spaces, this wouldn't work. And again, we're probably just looking at low populations here. The beauty about trapping is versus rodenticides and poisons is you're not going to have a dead carcass smelling and laying around in an area you don't want. But very, very effective. Baiting these snap traps with probably ideally peanut butter. Do you need to trap a rat for some reason with these? Probably more likely a meat source or something like that. But again, still work quite well, even though they've been around for a long time. Another option is a little bit of ingenuity and creativity fun is drowning, right? Sometimes you might see some mice sitting in a bucket of water and wonder, well, how to get in there? And again, it's jumping, but you can also be creative and Google out there some YouTube stuff, just placing a small board to be able to walk up or placing a bucket next to a wall and something intriguing that attracts them in there. One of the methods that really does this is if you put a strong piece of wire across the top of a bucket with a pop can across it and put some peanut butter or something on that bucket that makes them jump out to the can. They spin and they fall into the water, right? Not the number one option, but certainly something that's just a little bit different and changes your day up observing that. So you'll notice this trap down here in the bottom. This is one that a pesticide applicator has been hired is put out here. And you can come inside, come in. Again, it's a live trap that'll house them, only a one-way entry and no exit. So don't let these sit forever. and they'll start stinking as well. But placement of both bait and trapping is very, very important. And what we want to do is put them along a wall. We the snap traps, put them perpendicular to the wall so that snappable or that baited end is right against the wall. We don't just randomly place them out. They'll not get it unless they're really actively seeking that food for some reason. Put it where they'll run over it intentionally to help with that. So one of the things you don't notice I did put on here is beer, right? So that's an old wives' tale if you've ever heard of that. Like put a can of or a pan of beer out. Yeah, it'll attract them. You know, a yeasty smell probably entices them to come in, something sweet and different, but no proof that it'll actually kill them. It might make them a little happy, but there's other and better places for you to spend your money on a can of beer, and so that's not something we would recommend. Lots and lots and lots of products to work as rodenticides, right? Lots of them. You can go to your farm store. Just I took these pictures a couple days ago, and at our local one being Tyson's, see the end cap there's promoting a few of them. All down the aisle, right around that end cap was a whole variety of them as well. Lots and lots of different forms and volumes to purchase these at. We can order them from our animal health supplier catalogs. I'm not going to get into promoting certain makers, but there are some phenomenal products and manufacturers using similar formulations that all work, and they'll advise you as well what's there and what's available. So number one on them, read the labels. What's the active ingredient? And so I'm not going to talk brand names today, but let's talk about the basics behind what they are. Generally, the majority of rodenticides, the safe-handled ones, the common ones out there, are what we call anticoagulating rodenticides, right? So we have first generation ones, or Gen 1, and we have second generation ones. The first generation products, older products, proven products, they take multiple feedings are required to be fed there. Anticoagulants mean they're vitamin K antagonists. They work by inhibiting the vitamin K epoxide reductase enzyme, and then the animal can't produce the components needed to clot their blood, really. So that's how they work. Those on generation ones, they require multiple feedings, right? They're not going to kill in just a single bite. It may take 2 or 3 or more feedings potentially. And the other thing, same with trapping or baits. If you say, well, it's not working after day 1 or 2 of placement, give it a few days. I mentioned that they don't like things that are out of place. It takes a little time to acquire a little different taste to something, but they will certainly consume them. Those generation 2 products are really 1, maybe even 2 bite type feeding conditions that'll work there. And then there's some other products that are non anticoagulating components too. Bromothylin is more of a singular feed one. It's a truly a nerve poison. It causes a buildup of fluid around the brain with that, and it is a single feed product. Sometimes you'll see cholecalciferol. If you see something that has a D3 associated with this name, like Atumco's Agra D3 would be one. It's a multi-feeding one, but the nice thing about it is if you're labeled for organic production or other places that need an organic source of a rodenticide, cholecalciferol works pretty good. It causes death by kind of mobilizing calcium away from the bones and into the bloodstream. Is how that one works. And then zinc phosphide, there are more and more products becoming restricted use. And every state's got a little bit of different restriction too, particularly things if you look at California in their restricted use of products or the percentage of active ingredient in a product. Like California is really watching out for off-target animals like raptors, pumas, mountain lions, and so forth as they consume rodents that have been killed by certain products. But zinc phosphide, different formulations there. Those are ones that are a lot of times labeled on other things like moles, ground squirrels, And that product reacts with stomach acid to release a lot of highly toxic phosphoric acid, which ultimately kills the rodent. But again, read the label. There's an example up on your right-hand side. Read the precautions sometimes. Go on these manufacturers' websites. They have some phenomenal technical bulletins talking about which product works in what location for what population, not only just the species, but also what how quickly do you want to reduce the population, so forth like that. So lots and lots of different formulations exist with these products. Couple pieces about them without getting too deep into the science of the chemistries of them. The element you want to walk away here from today, really important to rotate products. You hear about this with lots of different pesticides, right, or chemicals. Rotate not just the active ingredient, but more importantly, from maybe a resistance standpoint. I've always thought in the past that's what it's about, but really it's more about enticing the animal with a new product, a new flavor, a new smell, a new formulation. Keep them actively seeking out something else. That's a real key about rotating. Give them some variety to entice them. Lots of different forms you can purchase product in: granular, pellets, loose and place packs, blocks, coated grain, for example. All of them might have a grain carrier in them to do this. All have their functions, right? All have their different weatherproofing components. Some are better placed in bait traps and boxes that we'll get to in a minute as well. But the labels will give you guidance as well in there. Some are indoor products, some are both outdoor and indoor type products as well. Safety, real key here to consider. Human safety, right? Especially thinking about children. We have to protect children on the farm or elsewhere where we have these products. Not just educate them, telling them no, but put it out of reach or put it in bait boxes. Same with off-target animals. That's what bait boxes are good for, controlling. And then watch where we exterminate or throw away our deads that we pick up, not to throw them out in an open environment where things like owls in particular. Owls can be a good friend of the farm in picking off mice and rodents and things. So we certainly don't want them ingesting a lot of this product through this. The PPE, wear chemical proof gloves, right, when handling a lot of this product. Very, very important. If it gets to things I haven't mentioned, fumigants. Fumigants would be an opportunity used in warehouses, used in heavy infestation, grain bins and so forth. We have a population out of control. And once we set a fumigant off, we would close that building, barn off, for example, if we want to use that. Most fumigants are always only for restricted use, certified pesticide applicators, licensed as well to use that. So I'm going to show you some examples of some commercial bait stations and some PVC bait stations, homemade ones, here in just a moment, and talk about restricted use pesticides. Again, regulations are changing. There's been some proposals out for a few years from EPA, and I don't know what 2026 is going to bring. Particularly, I haven't studied that, but do some searching on it. Products that would be labeled for restricted use and not just over-the-counter purchasing, and some of that's a volume-based component too, how much you would purchase. But these restricted use products can only be purchased and applied by a certified applicator. And Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship coordinates that here in Iowa as far as licensing. If that's a requirement, those folks have to retain records of application and purchases for 2 years. You may say, well, yeah, I've got somebody within the farm system or our company that is a certified applicator, so we can get the product. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean you can put it out in rebate. Direct supervision is an opportunity, but this is only good for about 21 days of your first employment. So you need to get certified on those types of products going forward. got to be 18 years of old, or if you're on the family farm, be 16 years of old for direct supervision opportunities. So do some inquiring on that, especially if you're listening in from other states and other parts of the country, or maybe even Canada and so forth across the country. Things are going to vary a little bit. So base stations. Lots of these commercially available ones made of different forms of plastic, very, very hardy, weatherproof. Places to put blocks or other components in out of the weather, a two-way entry, so particularly a rat or mouse can see their way through. You place that end up against the wall, whether it's exterior or interior, and they're going to go in through there, find their feeding, and carry on with life. Nice component about this is you don't have bait exposed. You don't have them dragging it out generally. They're going to stay in there, chew and eat and consume and so forth. The other thing about these, you want to stake them down. Most of these nowadays are lockable, so that they are, child and proof, and you cannot get into them. I've tried without the little plastic key to open them up, and you absolutely cannot. But there's a hole in here to drive a big stake or a nail in to keep them nailed down, so that a rat or an off-target pest that might crawl in there couldn't just carry it off and do that. So pretty cheap in all relation, right? You can find them from $9 to maybe $20 at most, or even cheaper, depending on how you package it with purchasing some bait potentially too. So the one on your right, making them out of PVC. I actually had one of my children make some of these here a couple of years ago, just as a 4-H project. For mice, putting together some 2-inch PVC. For rats, it'd be 3 or 4-inch type PVC. And you can anchor these to a wall. You can lay them down. But again, it's protecting from weather elements, from washing in the barn, from off-target pests as well. You can run a little piece of wire down through there and throw the blocks on top of it. But very, very effective. Pretty cheap to make a whole bunch of them and just have on hand and available. So a few examples of that visually to see what's working there. See here in this middle picture how we place the bait down a wire, and so that bait's just not freely laying inside there to be drug out. They've got to stay in there and chew on it and consume it there. So see on your right hand side, one that's been very effectively used, some evidence that that they've been eating, that they've been active. So it's a good thing. One of the things I talked about sealing up a facility, I did mention earlier, one of the biggest entry points is if you look at corrugated steel on the sides of our barns, and we've got it open on the bottom. We haven't placed it against a sill plate, or maybe your builder put in the foam or rubber gaskets, and those things do not hold back mice, right? But we need to get those covered. It's an easy entry point if they're exposed. So let's talk a little bit about evaluating efficacy, right? So it's one thing to just order a whole bunch of buckets of bait and have it on hand, or to throw it out, but should you have a budget, right? I'm not saying you should, but something you ought to think about, right? Does a 2,400 head barn require $100, $200, $50, $500 worth of rodent control a year? No right or wrong answer to that, but certainly a consideration that it's there. Or if it's not poisons or baits, what strategies might cost you, right? In doing that. The other thing is, it becomes something that you forget a lot of times. Checking bait traps, rebaiting, ordering product, and so forth like that. So I encourage designating somebody. If you're part of a farm team more than just an owner-operator, and you're a company situation, so forth, designate somebody, or even hire an outside exterminator applicator to take care of those things if it's something you can't stay up with, right? Professionals that are licensed can come around, make you a contract, or just, per visit, do it. Lots of other entities, restaurants, warehouses, feed mills and grain purveyors, elevators generally would hire that out to somebody consistently coming around. They know the products, they know the locations to use it at, and it works very, very, very effectively at doing it. So monitor populations, check your stations, rebate them, keep that product rotating. What type of a schedule is that in your SOP? Is it monthly? Is it every quarter? Depends on your population, right? And certainly the species. And if you've got rats around, it's certainly nothing to stay lax about for very long at all. And then recording is certainly something we want to do too. So a few things to close out, and maybe I've forgotten something, but if you've dozed off here through the presentation or you just want to skip through some things, here's my biggest takeaways, I think, for it. Get an SOP, get an integrated pest management program that would help you strategize how to tackle rodents on the farm. Get it posted somewhere in the farm so that other folks can see what it is. And maybe even, something I hadn't thought about before, but posting the fact that we are utilizing rodenticides on the farm would be something to think about. Backing up on safety is that if there happens to be an ingestion component for some odd reason for humans, call the Poison Control Center. Those are always listed on the product labels, and you can quickly find that. And take your label when you give the active ingredient. The folks behind poison control or at your hospital will quickly be able to figure out what the resolution is and an antidote to getting that fix. Reduce vegetation. I don't think we can say this enough. Site cleanliness, keeping things mowed, keeping a lot of that. When I suggested earlier, having our rock buffer, which is not only good for rodents, but just a good biosecurity practice in general. When we mow yards in the summer, I know my children do it. They'll throw all the grass right up alongside the buildings, right? Well, if we can blow a lot of that thatch away from that rock barrier, or if it does exist at this time of year, start going around, clean that off, burn it off or something, so you don't have that thatch laying on top of that buffer rock. Is a good practice. Keep it clean. Reducing feed sources. Keeping those bin pads clean, keeping things swept off the floor in feed storage areas or even in feeding locations, and thoroughly washing that out when we have those opportunities. Seal up our entry points, cracks, holes in foundations, in walls and curtains, feed lines coming through, under doors is a real key as well. Rotate products for both resistance standpoints, but more importantly, enticement to get them actively eating and consuming consistently. So then designate somebody that I just got off of that point. Designate time to get it done. Yes, it's going to take, an hour out of every month potentially, but a lot that in there and a lot that expense as well. So a few resources to leave you with in these things. There's a lot of information out there on the internet, but check the manufacturers, right? If you take a Neogen, if you take a Matumco, if you take a Bayer, if you take a handful of these companies and Google their information, they have some phenomenal technical bulletins again to go after. And then the Pork Information Gateway. And if there's some of you out here listening that are specialists in this area, go ahead and feel free to put your contacts in the chat box. It would be fine as well. Our Iowa Pork Industry Center hosts these monthly webinars. You can go out and find some more of these. We had done one a while back on insects, particularly flies and mosquitoes, for an example, from a pest control standpoint. Well, we've got different topics every single month and lots of resources available from Iowa State University through the Iowa Pork Industry website. The Pork Information Gateway actually has a couple fact sheets regarding controlling rats and mice in the facilities, and lots of good information on the Pork Information Gateway, which had been funded by your pork checkoff dollars, is now a component to Iowa State University leading that effort. So I'm sure I missed some things today in our discussions and trying to keep some things brief and overview and just encourage you to stay on top of it and to look into the different products. One thing I did mention as well, we talked about off-target species, but cats and dogs, so forth. You think about rat terriers going after rats. You think about cats being good mousers. True and false. Some cats are awesome at staying on top of mouse populations, and some just are lazy as all get out, right? So, and then the other thing about cats is they can be a disease spreader too. They can spread the parasite Toxoplasma gondii, and that's through their contaminated feces getting into the pigs can lead to toxoplasmosis. So, but there is an opportunity there for cats to be invited on the outside facilities. Certainly don't want them inside barns from that toxo consideration. But cats, owls, creating habitat for owls would be a good thing as well. While we're on the topic of mice and rodents and disease, biosecurity workshops are something that the Pork Industry Center is pleasingly offering. This is our biosecurity trailer. We can do workshops with and without our trailer, but this is a model of an example barn. We can walk through there. We can go through opportunities of demonstrating shower. We can use glow germ and track pathogen spread through hand washing and showering and changing booties and so forth, but a good opportunity. Reach out to Mark or I or one of our other 3 field specialists to consider what a biosecurity workshop might offer for you. So otherwise, I'm going to leave Mark. You want to add in some other thoughts that I'm sure I skipped over in some of our discussion, and we'll open it up for questions as well.
Got a couple of thoughts, but I will share. We do have a question that came in. If you have a large infestation, what are some of the ways to do a mass eradication to get back to square one before we can go back to just preventing?
Yeah, so I brought up fumigation, right? And we don't talk hardly at all about fumigation just because that's in the professionals' hands, those certified applicators. But if we have an opportunity to have an empty barn, or say you've purchased an empty barn or you've let yours go empty for a while, and particularly if it's an off-site barn with no housing nearby and something that was checked on, that would be an opportunity to fumigate, right? Interior. Now, if we have exterior things like rats, certainly wouldn't get that, although we can fumigate rat holes, right? Would be a consideration. So I would reach out to a pesticide applicator in the region and see what opportunities they might have and do that. Otherwise, look at these 2nd generation products and see which ones from a singular feeding standpoint get those products with the if you look at the active ingredient on these, most of these are like 100th, 500th, 1,000th% of active ingredient. And you'd say, well, that's pretty weak. Well, it doesn't take much. A mouse is an awfully small creature consuming an ounce a day. So I would say it's baiting at every single opportunity you can and layering those things, even with some of those live traps, right? Because some of those traps will hold 5 mice, and granted, maybe it's an every other day thing where you got to go in and empty out, but doing multiple steps at a time. But good question. No fun to address it for sure.
Thanks, Colin. And to me, just follow up, as you'd mentioned, mice and rats can certainly create structural damage. And those holes in foundations and walls, yes, that's important. But I think a secondary aspect to that is they certainly then can get into our wiring. And so if we have a lot of that structural damage, it also could create a lot more fire from an electrical fire standpoint risk if we've got heavy infestation of these rodents.
Yeah, and another rodent that most people don't think of as a rodent is a squirrel. If you've got, and we've seen this before, a squirrel getting in an attic, whether it's a residential attic or whether it's a barn attic, they can get up in an open eave or something like that created. And if they get in there, a lot of times they can't figure their way back out. And again, they like to chew as well. So good point on electrical wiring, fire hazards, and so forth too.
Certainly, I invite our attendees to certainly share additional questions in the chat. We're winding down on time, but certainly we'd like to address your questions. Colin, thanks for defending the Norwegians here, that the Norwegian rat is not necessarily from Norway. But
That's exactly right.
I did look up in terms of then the largest rats can be as much as 2 feet long, their tail being 8 inches of that 2 feet, but then being closer to 2 pounds. And that's certainly a substantial animal at that point in time.
Yep, exactly right.
Colin, you'd also, as you touched on in terms of record keeping, and so certainly that is important not only for farms, but then think about all of our licensed grain facilities, our co-ops, those types of facilities. Do you want to touch any in regards to some of their requirements for record keeping?
Yeah, I'm a little bit unsure on what they would be, but one of the things, the component of our pork quality assurance programs in the pork industry encourages and supplies some record keeping for those types of activities as well. So that would be a log that you could create and reuse from pork industry sources.
And that's where I was going to loop it back, that even farms, we really encourage you to keep records, and that's even through the PQA plus program. That's what we encourage folks to do, is keep records on use and maintaining that preventative element. We are reaching about that 1 o'clock time period. Is there any other final thoughts you'd like to leave with the attendees, Colin? And what would be your number one priority for our rodent control?
Number one priority, don't go lax on it, right? Just because we don't see a lot of evidence. Mentioned earlier that these dang rodents can change their reproduction rates pretty quickly to create a greater population, right? If they start seeing that they're under pressure, especially the rat. The rat, you kill the dominant males, and another one will become available, or the females will start producing more as populations get thinned out. They've got their tunnels built, they've got their habits made, or they'll even push out into other quote-unquote colonies, right? If they start growing more, so it pushes them to another site.
Well, Colin, thank you for your presentation. Again, I encourage any attendees to visit our Iowa Pork Industry Center website. You can click on webinars and you can find past webinars as well as rewatch this one that'll be posted in the near future. A couple other opportunities that will be coming up. December 8th, there is a PQA Plus advisor training. Those that there again train and to become an advisor. And then out into February 23rd to the 26th, we will have our Iowa Regional Pork Conferences that are in association with Iowa pork producers. But we've reached the 1 o'clock area. I thank you again for your attendance. Thank you, Colin. Have a great day.